Hey everybody, welcome back to another Nature's Always Right episode. My name's Stephen Cornett and I'm a market gardener helping you learn how to grow food for your home or for profit. And today's video is going to be especially for the market gardeners, but a lot of it will still apply to if you're doing raised bed gardening. So I'm going to break down my over 5 years of experience 24/7 farming of flipping beds, replanting beds, using amendments. I'm going to kind of touch on a lot of different concepts here, no-till and soil health, when you should use certain implements or tools, and just give you, all of my advice I can possibly give you from my experience. So today we'll be prepping this old Tatsoi salad mix bed, and salad mix is one of the hardest in-ground annual crops to get out because of how densely we seed it. And I'll also be touching on some other techniques for taller plants like kale and chard, things that you would want to cut and leave the roots underneath the ground to help feed the soil. And this is especially important for the no-dig gardeners out there, raised bed gardener. So we'll get into the tools first, how to rip out the stuff out of the ground and maintain soil health as you're doing it. Then we're going to talk about amendments, the full process all the way to seeding or transplanting. All right, so the best manual labor tools to use for taking out a salad mix or a bed of heads of lettuce or whatever it may be, any shallow rooted annuals, the scuffle hoe and then the walking hoe are the best. Now, if you're on a larger scale or you have a BCS, then a flail mower is fantastic for removing the crop residue and leaving behind this nice, really kind of green manure behind that you can just seed into. And it's very nice in the soil biology because it's not doing much disturbance. So if you are using mechanical cultivation, then there's really good options for no-till nowadays. But I'm not going to cover that since I do everything by hand. Okay, so with a hula hoe, it's pretty easy. It's just a little bit more labor than the walk behind hoe. So with the scuffle hoe, what I like to do, I'm really not trying to go down too deep. That's going to take a lot more effort, and I really want to leave as much of the roots intact under there as possible. I want to make sure I'm killing the plant good enough so that the plant doesn't regrow, but I'm leaving behind a good amount of the roots to feed soil. So if you have a 30-inch bed, it is kind of nice to straddle it. Don't forget to change between your right and left hand, and that'll help make both sides of your body strong and prevent an injury to one side of your body. And being able to be ambidextrous while farming is a huge benefit, I think. If we compare this to the Haas walking hoe, that's what this looks like. So I'm just a gigantic fan of the Haas wheel hoe, single or double wheel hoe with the sweeps. The sweeps are the best for taking out salad mixes. If you want a super all-purpose attachment, then I'd recommend the oscillating hoe. That's perfect for anything else like grasses or any more hardcore weeds, but the sweeps are definitely what you need for a salad mix. So a wheel hoe, much faster, much easier. I don't have to bend over. I'm using my chest and arms to drive and my legs to drive forward. And this is a pretty cheap tool. I think it's one I'd recommend having if you do a large garden, or obviously if you have a market garden or farm. I have a link for Haas Tools if you ever want to buy anything from them. It's just a way that you can support my channel for free if you're already going to get one of their great tools. And I've got the link down in the description. Thanks for using it. So there's two techniques that work pretty good for getting the salad mix out with this thing. It kind of depends on how deep the roots are, how strong they are. Like arugula, for instance, has the strongest roots out of any of the salad mixes that I grow. So these plants have been in the ground a while, so they're a little more established, but I push forward, I pull back. And the reason for that is some plants, especially if they're overgrown, they may get a little stuck in the sweeps. So by pulling it back and then going forward, it clears the blades. You can just pull back a little bit and keep driving forward. And the sweeps only have blades on one side, so only pushing forward is cutting. Now another technique that will sometimes work, especially if your soil structure is really nice, like at my other plot, you can just dig in and then continue to push the entire way without stopping. which is a little harder to do on this. So depending on how wet your soil is, how dense it is, you may not be able to do that consistent pushing technique. So in most soils, in most plants, you'll probably want to come back a little bit, push forward, come back. So here's a great example of cutting it just deep enough to get the roots, but not taking so much soil out, because we don't want to take a bunch of soil out of our beds. All right, next step, now we just gotta rake this up into piles, take it out of here. I'm gonna give it to my chickens, or you can make compost with it, whatever you'd like to do. Something else I wanna mention is stepping on your no-till beds. This is something that a lot of people highly recommend against, but from a lot of the evidence that I've seen and just my personal experience, Charles Dowding himself even talking about stepping on the beds being fine. Other people, or people run BCS, that's pretty heavy, and they're walking behind on their beds. They're still able to have really good soil health. So as far as walking on your beds, I still try to avoid it when it's comfortable. If I have to put my body at weird angles or things like that that will make me sore or might hurt me, then I step on the beds. Or you can do a half on, half off sort of thing, where one foot's in the pathway, one foot is in the bed. On a 30-inch bed, it's pretty easy to stay out of the bed. But if you do a 3-foot, 4-foot bed, then it becomes much harder to avoid that. But I just want to emphasize that I believe, in my personal opinion, I think it's totally fine. The one time maybe I'd avoid it is if you received a lot of rain, because then when you step on that soil, it's going to really compact. So I guess those are my recommendations surrounding that. There we go. So as you can see, lettuce is so much easier to take out, just a lot more shallow rooted. It took me like 60 seconds with the wheel hoe to completely obliterate this. And that's why I love having the wheel hoe now, and I would never go back to the scuffle hoe. And if you want to see a couple really in-depth videos about the wheel hoe, all the attachments and things you'd want to consider when purchasing one or using one, I'll put the video links down in the description. Also for my drip irrigation, anything else that applies to this system, I'll put links down in the description for that so you can find out more. So this is about how clean you need your beds to be. There can even be a little bit more crop residue left, and whatever's left is just going to decompose really fast on the ground. The main thing you want to make sure are out is you don't want anything still rooted, because that will try to grow back. But I'll also be showing you how to use the tilther today, and that also helps to eliminate some of this. Broad forking also will help rip out some of that. So getting it to this is just clean enough. And now we can move on to our next step, amendments. So now that our bed is cleared of the previous crop, now it's time to add in our amendments and compost. So I'm going to talk about a few different great nutrients that you can add, and the most important thing to understand is like when you would want to use them, why you wouldn't want to use them, and everything in between. My farm is mostly a compost-based farm, and I make all the compost here with my chicken coop, my 20 chickens. So that is where the majority of that comes from. I also do worm castings, aerated teas, create natural farming, a lot of different things to bring in fertility to the land here the last 3 years. You can run farms completely compost-based, like Ben Hartman or my friend Jared Smith. You can also, of course, add minerals in the form of like a rock dust, like azomite, which I love. I really like azomite for trace minerals. Kelp meal is another fantastic one to use for minerals and also feeding soil biology. That's what both of these will do really well at. And then an organic fertilizer. You can use all these together, and it just really depends on how fertile your soil is. After about 3 years of doing everything no-till beyond organic, my soil's so good that now I can back off a little bit on certain things. So just adding one wheelbarrow to one of my beds is enough to add a little bit more nutrients and then re-inoculate the beds again with really great beneficial microbes and fungi. If you're doing this as a business, especially, then I recommend getting a soil test done. You need to check for contaminants in your soil, first of all, and then it's also really nice to know kind of what is available in the soil for the plants to get to. And if you're doing it professionally, once a year is a great way to do it, and it's a good way to measure your soil change over time and showing more evidence that these methods are in fact superior to conventional chemical tilling-based agriculture. So let me show you how I'm going to mix these amendments into the soil. I'm going to do it very easily with the tilther. But if you don't have a tilther, you can just spread out the amendments on the ground, add compost to the top, and then seed directly into that. But the tilther helps incorporate more of these amendments into the soil more easily. And I'll touch on that in a minute. Now, if I wanted to really boost my beds for fruiting crops or something that's really going to demand a lot more nutrients, a lot of the summer crops, they just demand a lot more food. And if it's not available for them right in the soil, giving it to them directly via compost or organic fertilizer is the way to instantly feed them. Now, if you've got 10% organic matter, your soil tests come back incredible. You may not even need to add compost. You can just seed again or transplant again because there's so much fertility in that soil. So there's a lot to be considered. Most people don't have 10% organic matter or more. That takes, 7-8 years to achieve something like that if you're doing things the right way. So there's lots of things to consider. When it's a very complex topic that I can't cover in just 2 minutes here. So let's go ahead and mix in these amendments. Now, one way to save time would be to mix all of the amendments into the bucket and then spread them all out in one go. Especially if you have standardized beds, you can kind of come up with a base amount that you would add every time. And this is just an example of the way that you could save yourself headache and thinking and some time. But I wanted to show you each nutrient and kind of how much I'm adding. I added about 700 milliliter of azomite to a 40-foot bed. I'm just trying to add a little bit every single time. I don't want to overdo the minerals. I'm just trying to feed the soil biology and keep things really healthy. And of course the plants can absorb this as well. This is the micronized version. If you are going to use an organic fertilizer, I'll give you guys some recommendations on the description. And I'll show all these nutrients, all the tools, the other videos that you might be interested in will be in the description. If you're going to fertilize, then just follow the instructions for that fertilizer and how much you should be adding, and reference your soil tests to see what you're really lacking and what you should add more of. But over time, really, we should be relying on the soil biology and not our soil test, because ultimately it's so complex and we only understand a minute amount of science behind soil and soil life so far. So having that biology there, letting them do the work, that is the ultimate way to gain soil fertility. So now the next tool you might want to use after this is a broadfork. Now, if you don't know what a broadfork does, you should definitely go watch this video where I explain in depth about the soil biology aspect and what we're trying to achieve with this tool. But this is the point where I would do it, because now when we crack the ground, so when we lightly crack the ground to get a little bit more air in there, relieve compaction, some of that compost is going to fall through the cracks, and then it's just going to help inoculate those lower layers. Now, because my soil's so developed, I'm actually not using the broadfork hardly at all anymore. So it's more for beginning preparation and getting soil health jump started, and the minimal till tools that we use to try to unlock that, especially at the beginning stages of developing soil and trying to convert it. So since I won't be broadforking, we're going to do this no dig. I will show you another minimal till tool. So this is the tilther. It's run by a cordless drill, like many of the small farming tools nowadays. And it's just basically a mini tiller with no wheels. It doesn't do any compaction, and it only chops down about 1 to 2 inches. So it's a very shallow till, and it just creates a really nice tilth on the top of the soil. What I think this tool is really good for is mixing amendments and blending in maybe compost that's not sifted or not 100% broken down. It really helps make a better seed bed. If I was just to seed into this compost right here, because it's not 100% broken down, the seeder might get caught up a little bit. As the shoe pushes through all of this, it'll start grabbing some of the leftover straw and stuff. The tilther's a great way to alleviate that issue. So that's what I like it for and recommend it for. It's not for everybody. It is an expensive tool. Luckily, Johnny's has some competition now. There's the Curly's Planters, I think is the name of the company. They're in Australia. I'll link to them. But they now have their own paper pot transplanter, their own tilth, or they have an automatic broadfork that connects to the BCS. They're really innovating, and that competition is going to drive down the prices on tools like this. So it's really exciting that that's finally happening now. Competition is key to quality and lower prices. Just like in the soil, the more diverse microbes, the more competition, the better the soil. If you'd like to see an in-depth video all about the tilther and how it works and how to use it, go ahead and click right here. So our next step after tilthing, you may not need to do that step, but after putting down the amendments, now we're going to rake this and get it super nice for seeding or transplanting. This is my bed prep rake. Since I do 30-inch beds, this is a 28-inch rake. So as I go down, it's the perfect size because about 1 inch on each side of the dirt gets pushed out. And this way, I don't have to stake out my beds. You've probably seen a lot of people use stakes and lines, and I've tried that, but honestly, if you have the right size bed prep rake, and you're in like a backyard or something that's like up against a perpendicular line, it's pretty darn easy to just rake it and have perfect pathways and bedways. I don't find that mine shift that much. So for me, like using the lines and the stakes is a little bit of a waste of time. I think it's great for establishing beds when you're building them, but once they're permanent and they're in there, they're good to go. So the chickens, unfortunately, the chickens are helping me rake a little bit too much. So let's get them out of here and then we'll do this. So when I'm raking my beds, the first thing I do is use the teeth. And I'm putting a small amount of pressure down, very small, just to help flatten everything. So usually after about 2 passes, that's pretty good enough. I like using the teeth at first too, because sometimes you might find it pulls something else out of the ground that you didn't want in there. The next thing that I'll do is push in my sides. And Jody Roebuck, shout out to Jody Roebuck out in New Zealand. I love his technique. He goes like this. Okay, now I've got my real nice shape. And now for the finishing touches, I use the back of the rake. So if you get a bed prep rake, then it needs to have a flat side on the back. And now I can just drag it and it will work pretty well. So I can do like a pass or two like that. But as I'm moving down, you could see that there's a little bit of a bump right there. So I can kind of smooth that out. Keep moving, keep going, keep going. There's a little bump here. Smooth it, keep moving. So now, check out how nice it looks. Perfect for seeding. Now, I don't get too anal about how flat this thing gets. My land is already basically flat out here. Maybe if you were on a bit of a slope, you'd want to be extra careful about the flatness of the top of your bed, or maybe you even want to slightly angle it back towards the hill so that any water that does come runs backwards and not down the slope and will pull soil away from your beds. Now the reason we don't need to be that anal is because we're going to use a direct seeder after this, and you'll see that as we run the seeder, it makes these little furrows, and it's the perfect little seed bed at the end. The edges are maintained because of the way the seeder pushes out the soil. If you're transplanting, you also don't need to get too crazy, because as you transplant, they're kind of going a little bit more shallow than the surface of the soil typically. You might be using overhead, so I don't get too crazy on the bed prep. Once I get my nice shape, I'm ready to go. I'm trying to do this work as quickly as possible. So the final step is just to plant this, and I can do direct seed or I can do transplant, and we're all done. Set up the lines again, use overhead if I need to, and that's it.